I think so.
Yes. So welcome everyone to the West East Bi-Postal Poets of the Pandemic and Beyond. I hope we're sort of moving into the beyond now, but who knows? Your co-hosts are me, Susana Case, Lynn McGee, who is the founder of West East, Carolyne Wright, and Sandy Yannone. And our readers today are Cal Freeman, David Lehman, Michael Montlack, and Hilda Raz. And special thanks to Madeline Barnes, who is the tech support person for us, and Bill Moore for being the tech support sponsor. So everyone in the audience is, well, pretty much everyone in the audience is muted to protect against bombing. And if you can keep yourself muted during the reading, that would be good. The chat column is available and you can share your comments there. And you'll also be able to view the poets' bios and links to buy their books in the chat column. And Madeline will screen share and show you the covers of their books. We're recording this, so if you would like more privacy, you can stop your video. And I'm going to start by introducing the first reader, Cal Freeman. It says John Freeman on his rectangle, but I know him as Cal Freeman. I first met Cal and was introduced to his work when we read together at the Bowery Poetry Club soon after Fight Songs was published. This is his earlier book. And the book blew me away. There were poems about Detroit, about Rust Belt life, but also about the desecration of the natural world, the pronghorn antelope, for example. I noticed that someone on Amazon reviewing the book, a Trump fanatic, didn't like that the description of the book mentioned that this was a reply to Trump and his people from someone who came from that landscape, but came from it wanting justice and beauty instead of Trumpian brutality. Since I'm pretty certain we don't have any right-wing fanatics here, I think we'll all be able to appreciate the craft and content of Freeman's very compelling work. His new book is Poolside at the Dearborn Inn, which can be pre-ordered now, and in which Freeman continues to probe working class life and ecological destruction of his beloved Michigan. There'll be a formal bio and purchase link in the chat, and I give you now Cal Freeman.
Thank you so much for having me tonight, and for that wonderful intro, Susana. It's really good to see you again, and really wonderful to be here in this company. So thanks so much. I'm going to start out with a poem called Half Wishes of the Cockatrice. This poem first appeared in Image Journal. And the cockatrice is a mythological creature that has the quality of looking someone dead just by looking. Half Wishes of the Cockatrice. To skim a curdling light from the blue of dawn, to slither in the furrow of a mud-churned wagon rut, to bellow above warbling and spit forth, no parched throat, no red eyes, no dust. To bless the day without looking any of them in the dying canopy dead, but knowing one bald morning they'll collapse in shrieks with sticks and feathers. This next poem is the title poem of my forthcoming books. It's called Poolside at the Dearborn Inn. I grew up on the west side of Detroit, and now I live in Dearborn, which is, of course, the home of Ford Motor Company. It's a big UAW town. So there are a couple of references in this poem to Henry Ford. There's a reference to the novelist John Dos Passos, and a guy named Harry J. Brooks, who was one of Ford's test pilots when he was briefly exploring aviation. Poolside at the Dearborn Inn. I sit near the shallow end, reading John Dos Passos's The Big Money and scribbling in a notebook while my wife does laps. He never drank, never smoked. His mother said he was a good boy and he believed it. Dos Passos writes of Henry Ford. Swimming slowly and maintaining the shape of the stroke is an art. The fact that we can stare down the blank and be happy while bathing ponderous bodies is nothing if not inspiring. I'm 36 and can't stand the sight of my sallow face in mirrors. The Fords built this hotel to serve an airport that never materialized. Harry J. Brooks's death off the coast of Melbourne, Florida in 1928 put an end to the flivver plane. Friends described the old man as spooked and distraught over Brooks. This I learned from my grandmother, not Dos Passos. She would sit poolside here every day in July, eating green grapes and playing bridge beneath a Canadian maple tree. The autopsy of the flivver plane found that Brooks had jammed wooden toothpicks in the vent holes of the fuel cap to keep moist air from entering. The toothpicks plugged the vent, causing engine failure. Nobody found the pilot's body. It was lost somewhere along those coastal shoals, mutilated and incinerated, dispersed by swift Gulf currents. Nobody found Jose Robles, Dos Passos's friend and translator, thought to have been murdered by Stalinists during the Spanish Civil War either. Dos Passos's politics would drift rightward toward Ford's in the years following Robles's death. I never made a flight in an airplane, and I don't know that I'm particularly anxious to. I would, though, like to take a trip in a dirigible. Bring one out here sometime. Won't you, Dr. Eckener, and give me a ride? Ford would only go on 3 short flights in his lifetime. Publicity stunts mostly, and never after Brooks's crash. History is mostly bunk. I wouldn't give a nickel for all the history in the world, he once said. The only history that is worth a tinker's dam is the history we make today. I take my drink into the shadows of the Georgian brick building and think again of my mother's mother, Gwendolyn Morrissey O'Neill, who, when I'd ask her questions about Ford's goons beating up her cousin Jim, a UAW organizer, or read her excerpts from the Dearborn Independent, would tell me to lay off of them. They were a good family. My wife is the last to leave the pool. She tastes of gin and chlorinated water as we kiss. The swimming pool gleams in this waning light, and I know these Epicurean afternoons and sleepy evenings will one day go on without us. I'm thinking of the coiled muscles of a dolphin's body arcing just a few feet above the surface of the water, and old and young people alike pretending to stave off eventuality. How all beauty is anachronistic down to the springs of the diving board. The sick tropes that knowing history is supposed to ward off, falsely glorifying the past. The splendor of this courtyard, bermed by Japanese maple and honeysuckle, mulch the color of the brick. How Ford's aphorisms sounded both ignorant and profound, which might ultimately be the litmus for true poetic statement. Can it be both stupid and deep? I keep coming back to my grandmother who chased her children, she said were sired by the devil, down by the block when the streetlights came on. How she told me the Fords were a good family to let them be. She was always playing cards, here or in her kitchen, solitaire or bridge, smoking Doral cigarettes she never inhaled, blowing smoke rings at the kitchen ceiling or into the dusty leaves of birch and maple trees. Shuffling decks with the indelible sound of a mourning dove taking flight, smoke whistling from her nose, the shape of the rings holding and flowering like epiphytes on hot, still days. This next one is called the Ferris wheel, and it's also about my grandmother and this area. And there's a big Uniroyal tire on I-94 if you ever drive through, drive toward Detroit from the west. If you're coming out of the airport, and there's this giant Uniroyal tire that was actually a Ferris wheel in Queens. Back at the '64 World's Fair. It's always fascinated me when I drive by it. So this is called the Ferris wheel. I was really appreciative. This was recently a finalist in the River Styx International Poetry Contest, and it'll be coming out with that journal soon. So I was really excited about that. Through the window screen plugged with wadded paper napkins, you could see the giant Uniroyal tire hovering above the interstate. Its steel Ferris wheel skeleton encased in black polyester resin, a relic of the '64 World's Fair. It once carried Jackie Kennedy and the Shah of Iran high over Flushing Meadows, but by the time it found its way to Allen Park, Michigan in 1966, it was out of love and its gondolas were gone. Grandma Gwen believed you should die at home. There was a perseverant beauty in it, no matter how uncomfortable or embarrassing things got. Her mother, Marie, my great-grandmother, would fight with us over gumdrops in her final years. I mean, really fight with donkey kicks and closed fist jabs in a bedroom that smelled of peppermint and piss. Granduncle Theron's name came from one of Actaeon's dogs. He spent his dotage there, but all he ever mauled were canned pears and cottage cheese in hollow yellow cheeks. She referred to him as a committed old bachelor. It goes without saying, all of them are gone, even Gwen, who died in that bedroom with my mother, sponging her lips and reciting the poetry of Eugene Field into the plush shell of her ear. The tragus, staid century of all we will forget. The pulsatile tinnitus of the drum, just moments before the end. The whole house whooshing like a planet in its perihelion tilt.
Beautiful.
Thank you. I've got one more for everybody, and I was just so honored to be invited by a poet like Susana H. Case, whom I admire. You know, someone was talking earlier about how important water is, and as a Michigander with, you know, I think 22% of the world's fresh water supply bordering by state, I really related to that. In a place I like to go up to a lot, I'm gonna see if I'm doing this right. I know you're from Michigan if you use your hand to, but up here at the tip of the thumb is a place called Port Austin, Michigan. And that's where this next poem is set. I like to go up there quite a bit. It's really beautiful. It's on the shore of the Saginaw Bay of Lake Huron. Rising levels in Saginaw Bay this summer have ruined the wooden stairs leading from the breakwall to the beach. Rust rises to a high water mark not seen here in decades, an inscrutable ecological signpost. A beetle scampers out of mud-dried kelp. A shelf of stones 30 yards out veils a precipitous drop into green depths. The stench of life is everywhere. My mother-in-law tells a story of coming here as a girl and having to shovel mounds of alewives from the beachhead before swimming. This book I'm reading describes the lake bed as a field cobbled with invasive mussel shells and refers to those zebras and quaggas flushed from the ballast tanks of freighters as biological filtering machines that trick us into thinking the lakes are well. A middle-aged woman rafts out beyond the sandbar and her husband swims to deliver her a drink, some sugary rum concoction in a plastic water bottle, his ratty ponytail flat against his sweaty, water-kissed skin. Off to the southwest, the strokes of windmills mimic the bathers, soaking up sun and water in their plastic rafts. Seagulls bark at each other in the foam, plucking gobies from breakwater, wounding them before dropping them in sand. Bouts of animal behavior. This propensity for pure fun, different than joy or love, deleterious as mussels straining algae from fresh water. Boats cruise the clear as glass surface. Poetry, despite what has been written in the shadow of murky etymologies and unkept epics during the dull, regenerative paces that compose our human time, is little more than a series of absurd acts of love we could never plan out in the morning or the day before at dusk. A chin cupped in a palm, a kiss, a cocktail weighted through the combers. Thanks so much for listening to me tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Cal. That was really fine work. I love what Lynn called in the chat Americana, and I think that's very much the northern Midwest, as we call it. And I also think of poets like Philip Levine, who is from that same neck of the industrial, post-industrial Rust Belt woods. But now we will be going to another neck of the woods to New York City, where David Lehman has been living and teaching for these many years with productive careers at the New School, teaching up in Ithaca at a number of writers' conferences, which is where I first met you, David. I don't recall which conference. It was somewhere in the greater Vermont area, I believe. But that was quite a while ago. But the first time I really connected with David Lehman was as the editor of the series editor of the Best American Poetry. And I can hold up one of the issues. Here's one of the issues, the one that I happen to have. The guest editor that year was my wonderful colleague, former colleague now, David Wagner. And David Wagner was really in a wonderful conversation with David Lehman as they were editing that particular year, which was Best American Poetry 2009. But then, alas, David Wagner was unable to deliver a presentation at the low residency program, the residency of the Whidbey Writers Workshop residency that January of 2009. So I was asked to do that. So I was able to have a sort of a conversation back and forth via email with David Lehman. And I was very pleased to have done that. I wanted, though, to get him to sign this, which is a book of his, The Daily Mirror, which I have had for quite a number of years, and it has inspired me to write poems every day, one poem a day at least, over the course of a year. So this is one volume that I think has been really key to David Lehman's work. He's also, he's not just a literary critic, I would say, in the style of, let's say, Harold Bloom or Northrop Frye, but a writer that ranges across the whole spectrum of, sort of popular and general culture. He writes film criticism and reviews for the American Scholar. He's also the editor, besides being the founding series editor of the Best American Poetry, he's also edited an anthology of American poetry. He writes detective novels and just any number of works in other film reviews, detective novels, and just an amazing output of poetry. So I think we are looking forward today to hear some of what David has on offer. So please welcome David Lehman. And that's a good portrait there, a good profile of David. You know.
I want to read them.
So David, unmute yourself, please. Here we go. Whoops.
Can we unmute him as hosts?
There he is.
Did I did it right?
Yes.
you
Yeah, I'm
did.
still rather a novice at this. But what a nice introduction. Thank you so much for all the kind words, and thank you all for attending this reading. It's very nice to see good friends, old friends, and new ones. So I'll read, let's see, from a book that's coming out in September called The Morning Line. This is what it looks like, but I don't know if you can see, it's a portrait of the poet. Anyway, The Morning Line, here's, I'll read some poems from the book. This one is called Romulus and Remus. Look for Remus in the index of a book, and you are bound to get C. Romulus, which is perfectly logical, but makes me wonder about indexes or indices, and why I prefer the former as the plural, except in a financial context, and how an index to a book that may not exist may imply a whole biography, as my friend Paul Violi showed in his poem, Index. My late friend, Paul Violi, whom I still see in the street sometimes, walking along at an unhurried pace. So if I walk fast, I will catch up to him at the corner before the light turns green. I think there's a somewhat darker edge to that poem than at first seems to be the case, perhaps. By the way, Susana, I am writing a poem a day, a journal of the plague year. I've been doing that for about, well, a year plus. So thank you for mentioning the Daily Mirror. Here's a poem called You're My Thrill. You're My Thrill is the name of a song, and the dedication line is as sung by Helen Merrill in 1965. A particularly good rendition, I thought, with Dick Katz on the piano. You're my thrill. One, you're my thrill, my joint, my shot, my magic pill. I dwell in that gaudy den of smoke and mirrors where, when we close our eyes, I shall take you to paradise, the casino where we always win. I may never get wise, may never disbelieve these lies, yet I know I must get high. Two, admit it, you're one of us. You didn't miss the bus. You need to get drunk on wine or weed or stronger junk. Maybe you're addicted to kinky sex, bouncing your checks, blaming your ex, imitating Oedipus Rex. Or maybe you need a fix of speed, acid, ecstasy, sin, coke, angel dust, gin, or the white magic of heroin. You're my thrill, where's my will? To you, therefore, I declare, quoting Charles Baudelaire, drink in hand, bidding you goodbye, you must get high. A poem I worked on for many years. Sometimes you write a poem, sometimes I write a poem in one sitting, and that's wonderful. In other cases, I write a draft, and then 20 years later, I find it and finish it. That was the case with a poem here called Philately. I don't know if that's a generally familiar word to everyone, but it refers to stamp collecting. Philately, it happens every year. A dead man is elected justice of the peace. The jury is sequestered, each juror having been asked, are you now or have you ever been a collector of stamps? Because the defendant smuggled the drug money in rare stamps from the Caribbean island whose aged dictator appears on airmail issues. When cigarettes are banned in public, the dictator's cigarette is airbrushed out of the picture, which is one way to erase the past. You can also change the name of the country, inflate the currency, inflame the populace, and kill the old people who remember the old days. Quote, you get all that from a set of postage stamps, end quote. Yes, though they too are disappearing from our lives. As a collectible, coins have left stamps in the dust, the way Secretariat outdistanced the field at the Belmont. Nevertheless, when the passenger beside me asks, what do you do? I like to say, I'm a philatelist, and see what happens. I'd like to read a poem dedicated to my wife, Stacy. It's called Panama Hat. You know, if only one had taken note of the time when one began, one would have an idea of how long one had read. I like the use of one in that. Panama Hat for Stacy. What kind of poems do you write? The interviewer asked. And I said, occasional poems. Each day is an occasion. Take today. The sun shone on my face, shielded by a Panama hat made in Ecuador, and the fate of a leaf in a hurricane was the day's best simile for financial markets, where the value of green keeps going up. The trees and the grass are vying in the green competition because good is as visible as green, and the lawns are emerald like the eyes of my beloved when she saw the ring with two hearts and an emerald crescent in the jeweler's case. The food tasted good and simple: beans and rice, chicken, coconut sorbet, white cherries, lemonade, and Matthew's concoction with chinar and jalapeno infused gin. The ice cubes in the glass sounded like nothing but themselves. The sky was blue, the shirt fit, I washed the car. The newspaper reported that Cambridge is catching up to Oxford in real estate prices, and my 1,000 words on To His Coy Mistress were nicely illustrated as I sat and sipped in the sun. And then I read the new bio of Duke Ellington and Helen Forrest's own story and tilted my hat as I walked, celebrating the day, the occasion for taking a walk, enjoying the light, and my new Panama hat. Well, I thought I would read one more poem. It's since the poster about the event mentioned the plague or the pandemic. I thought I'd read a poem that I wrote on May 22nd of 2020. But I didn't want to write about the epidemic, but it sort of sneaks in, you know. Anyway, the morning line, May 22nd, 2020. 1. You can pick horses on the basis of their names and gloat when Justify wins racing's Triple Crown, or when in 1975 crowd favorite Ruffian, Queen of the Century, goes undefeated until she breaks down in a match race with Derby winner Foolish Pleasure. Who could root against Ruffian? Did patriotic Englishmen cheer when Sir Winston won the Belmont last year? I rejoice when Monarchos, a 10-to-1 bet, became the second horse ever to break the 2-minute mark at the Kentucky Derby. Why did I pick it? I like the name. Those 2 minutes in May 2001 and the giddy hours after now seem a little like a garden party in England in July 1914 as the 19th century approached the finish line and collapsed. Today, you might buy 50 shares of Qualcomm at 78.11 or 500 shares of Sirius at 5.15 because you like the sound of their names. And you may make these trades even without knowing a thing about what the companies produce or do. As luck would have it, under current market conditions, a portfolio consisting of these two stocks, plus Alphabet, Amazon, and Apple, would satisfy our poetry criterion and stand a decent chance of outperforming the market, as would a portfolio consisting of attractive stock symbols like ACES, CAT, CO, NICE, QQQ, SPY, TAN, and TOKE. Under current market conditions, there's the rub. If current market and conditions are variables, chance determines the outcome as in abstract art. There will be an epidemic, an earthquake, a hurricane. These will take place, but you can't say where or when. And the same goes for a cyber attack crippling the electric grid, a terrorist outrage in a tunnel or bridge, the meltdown of a nuclear power plant, or even a rebellion of angry birds menacing the human population of a Northern California town. What if the stars should take a powder? Can't happen? You never know. If the sun and moon should ever doubt, they'd immediately go out, wrote William Blake. The if is even more important than the doubt. If you can conceive it, it can be done. Scoff all you like. If history has taught us anything, it's that you can kill anyone, and Ladbrokes of London will lay the odds. Acts of God if you're a traditionalist, or black swan events if you're a secular humanist, cannot be predicted. The blather of experts will do you little good because the unknowns are in flux and the gulf is sometimes wide between the odds set by the handicapper for the morning line and the betting public at the track when the horses reach the starting gate. Nevertheless, though playing the ponies has declined as a pastime, though market crashes have spooked retail investors, and though everyone knows the odds are stacked in favor of the house, people will continue to bet and bet big on races and contests, cards and dice, games and turns of the wheel, stocks and bonds, options, rates of exchange, orange juice futures, elections, murders per capita, jobless claims, the number of crates of disinfecting wipes Clorox has shipped since March 15, 2020, or the number of current ad campaigns in which part of the pitch is, we're in this together. At the moment, I have a side bet on never bet against America, a phrase that has caught on since Warren Buffett used it at Berkshire Hathaway's virtual annual meeting. The phrase frames the crisis of the day as a wager about who will prevail when Affirmed and Aladar go head to head for a fourth showdown, or when the Celtics of Larry Bird square off one more time against the Lakers of Magic Johnson. The Derby and Preakness won't be run until the fall this year, and they won't be playing the NBA finals in June. People will miss the games, but they will bet on much else with cash or play money or just in that realm of the imagination that prefigures the things we do. Part 2. Gambling is a natural human instinct because life is a gamble in which you will lose your shirt or draw a third ace to fill a full house on days equally rare. Life, Baudelaire wrote, has but one true charm, the charm of gambling. All beliefs are bets, though a bet is not necessarily a gamble. If the lockdown goes into a third month and we get a heat wave and beaches are closed and there's no sports betting, it's a safe bet there will be rioting in the streets and a big spike in day trading. You can also bet on the persistence of prejudice, political bickering, fakery, hypocrisy, bureaucracy, and the power of the lie. But no one will take the bet, and it's not a gamble. You need a degree of recklessness to be a gambler. Religion is risky, a big gamble, though not in the way Pascal proposed and Voltaire refuted. Pascal's wager is not, as he tries to sell it, a real gamble. He would subject a belief in God to a cost-benefit analysis. If you bet on God and God exists, you win. If you bet against and you lose big. The argument is seductive, but the proposition has lost all conviction. The risk has been drained from it. If only self-interest could furnish the grounds for belief. You might also say that the ends, divinity, stand in diametric opposition to the means, logic, in Pascal's equation, which remains, despite its flaws, a fascinating subject of contemplation, like the bust of Homer in Aristotle's hands. God is a scandal which pays, Baudelaire wrote in his Squibs, trans Christopher Isherwood. God is the sole being who has no need to exist in order to reign. Gambling requires faith, not assurance or certitude, but something finer, rarer, faith, a near rhyme of truth and death that sounds like fate, which is how Willem de Kooning pronounced the word. And what is faith but the opposite of doubt, a force to press back against the dismal news of the day, the doubt that arises in the mind of the prophet, beholding the wickedness of the people. Religion requires risk, like the risk you feel when you are so deeply involved with another person that you cannot imagine living your life without her. The inevitability of loss, a much misunderstood aspect of gambling, is not a deterrent, but an attraction. The experience of loss is as potent a stimulant as the experience of jumping from a low-flying plane, trusting your parachute will work. I didn't realize that this was so long a poem, but there is a third part that's fairly short. 3, a compulsive gambler's habit is as hard to break as smoking or drinking, maybe harder. The gambler believes in the God of chance, which is the wrong God to believe in. Gamblers act on superstition just as athletes do. Wear a shirt with red in it every Sunday. On a winning streak, use the same bat, do not shave, eat the same breakfast every day. Change your stance in a slump, though you know nothing will help in a slump. Skillful poker players put a game face on a nasty turn of events, but they do that when the cards favor them too. Skill or luck? People think mastering the skill is the hard part, but they're wrong. The trick to poker is mastering the luck. To the writer, all is raw material, bad luck or good. A novelist friend developed a system of winning at roulette, but it did him more good as the backdrop for a story than in practice in Monte Carlo. The philosophical gambler takes the path of the melancholy pickpocket in a 1950s French movie. To him, if I may speak of myself this way, luck is a muse, and Frank Lesser's song, Luck Be a Lady, communicates the risk-taker's situation. The phrases he likes have 2 or even 3 separate meanings, which he must conjoin, so that Stendhal's The Red and the Black is red in the context of the red and black boxes on a roulette wheel carpet, or the red and black squares of the chessboard in a match pitting the Russian grandmaster against the American upstart. And the morning line signifies not only the bookmaker's calculations, but also a verse to speak when the bell tolls for thee. Well, that's the title poem of my new book, The Morning Line. thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, David. That was wonderful. That was inspiring.
Thank you. That was really, that was a really wonderful reading and gambling. You know, my head is kind of spinning, you know, just considering that there was a lot, you know, I need to read it, you know, I'd like to read it on the page, you know, but that was wonderful. And Cal, I really enjoyed your reading as well, very much. So it's my honor now to introduce Michael Montlack. I think Madeline's going to show you the cover of his book. I'll just hold it up if I can get it in front of the camera. I'm not very good at figuring out reverse things, but so when I first saw the cover of Daddy, Michael Montlack's new book of poetry just out from New York Quarterly Books, I assumed it would be very gay and have a lot of sex in it. The cover illustration is Seahorse by Christopher Shields, and it reminds me of the hyper-masculine drawings of Toa Kulaks and Tom of Finland, I think we know him as, and that featured in his words, proud men having happy sex with each other, often in a military uniform. You know the illustrations I'm talking about. The drawings appeared in the 50s and they continued for decades to joyfully subvert the stereotype of gay men as effeminate. And this has to do with Michael's poetry. The poems subvert stereotypes in a way that comes out of everyday life, that come out of familiar places, familiar to me anyway, and I think will familiar to you, a crowded plane, elderly parents and their adult children. And the title of the book itself, Daddy, calls up gay icons like the classic leather daddy and those that have spun out more recently, like the silver daddies, the muscle daddies, the bears, and there are even femme daddies, and you know, more daddies than you can shake a stick at, and their opposite, I think, would be the butch daddies, the woman papa canonized by Joan Nestle, who points out that gender expression intersects with class, that when they go to women's parties and her lover says, I load trucks in a warehouse, the other women stop talking to her. And she says, I want to shout at them. Where is your curiosity about women's lives? Where is your wonder at boundaries broken? So Michael's work too looks at class, often in the context of the family, and with a tenderness that is also hilarious. The illustrated man on the cover of Daddy has a tattoo of a seahorse, and the seahorse's pregnant belly pushes out his bulging bicep. As you probably know, the male seahorse, or if there are any sixth graders in the audience, they can tell you, the male seahorse carries the brood of baby seahorses to term and gives birth to them. The opening poem to Daddy, How to Mother Like a Man, features a male seahorse whose mate, quote, inflates him with life, a live chessboard piece moving nonchalantly in the current, gentle but with intention, a knight really doing whatever it takes to protect the queen. In a way, the male seahorse is protecting his own inner queen. She resonates throughout the collection. I mean, that's just my opinion, Michael. You can reject that if you want to. Rachel Eliza Griffins writes that Daddy offers us poetry drenched in irony, sexiness, and transformation. Richard Blanco writes that Daddy brilliantly captures the full spectrum of gay life, from childhood through middle age, all its camp humor and devastating losses, its plentiful joy and wrenching pain. Blanco also describes the work as accessible yet immensely poetic language at its best. And I agree with all of that, and would add that the construction of the poems is seamless, rational, and builds to truths that feel very affirming. Please welcome Michael Montlack.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn. That, I'm blushing. So thank you. And thank you to Susana, Carolyne, Madeline, and Sandra for co-hosting the event, and for Lynn for inviting me. And it's really exciting to be reading alongside Hilda and David, who I both had the privilege of studying with over the years. So I'll read a couple poems from Daddy, but I thought I would start with a new poem. I'm here in California. Last summer and this summer, I've driven across country and back. because I couldn't take sitting in my apartment. Last year was in a van. This year I took Amtrak and stopped on the way in different places. And now I'm staying with my friends Dorianne and Joe, and we've been writing a little bit. And I wrote this one, so I'm excited about some of the new stuff. I'll read some of them. And we do these kind of games and prompts where we write. So this is a new poem I wrote while here in California. I'll start with that and then read some poems from the book. And I want to say thank you for all. I see so many of my students here. I really appreciate them coming out. I know it's summertime, you could be at the beach. So thanks for everybody coming out, and especially to my students. So this is called Lifetimes. Imagine the lives you might have lived, quietly balled up like pairs of socks in a drawer you never open. Like, what if you had married that bearded Capricorn? You'd be in Denver now, watching that beard slowly gray. Or maybe mending a rickety garden gate somewhere alone in California, your faded Angels jersey, muddy like your knuckles. You might imagine the same yard with a modest in-ground pool instead of the garden, or imagine having convinced that Capricorn to move with you to California, even shave his beard. Just for fun, imagine him developing a disdain for Denver and attribute it to how much he loves you. When that seems unrealistic, unleash the monster, the life where you finally find the nerve to have an affair with your friend's partner, ending their marriage and your friendship. Enough trauma to make you run off to Denver with that Capricorn, despite your hesitation and your disdain. If it keeps coming back to him, imagine the version in which you are the Capricorn. And if that doesn't work, imagine still another, one where you don't garden or swim or watch baseball. Hell, make it one where you're not even looking for love and never had the slightest interest in astrology. Okay, so this, I'll read that couple poems from the Daddy book. It matches the room I'm in. It probably disappears. So the opening poem is like a proem, and there's 3 sections. One section's called Daddy, and they're sort of like aging as a gay man, sort of sexy poems, and looking at masculinity in different ways. And then the second section's called Mother, and it looks at all different kinds of mother figures, from my adoptive mother, who raised me, my birth mother, who I recently discovered by accident, my twin sister who became a mother, Stevie Nicks is my spiritual mother. So it has all different kind of mother figures. And then the third section is called Daddy, and it's about the father that raised me and his passing, as well as sort of father time poems. But the book opens with this this How to Mother Like a Man poem. I'll read that. It was quoted before. Thanks, Lynn. How to Mother Like a Man. I like how the male seahorse gives birth, making it easier for the female exhausted from egg production. How the round puffed belly looks like my father's beer gut. How despite the protrusion, he appears sleek, in suspension, ornately ridged, that curly Q tail coiled demurely until it's ready to link with his mate, who inflates him with life, a live chessboard piece moving nonchalantly in the current, gentle, but with intention, a knight really, doing whatever it takes to protect the queen. I'll read a poem from the Mother section. And by the way, we talked about Prairie Schooner before, and Hilda having been the editor. This was in Prairie Schooner, this poem. I was really excited about that last year. And it's called, my twin sister and I were adopted and raised together from birth. And we did a DNA test a couple of years ago for fun, you know, these ancestry tests. And we weren't looking for anything, but all of our biological family fell out of it. And though both of our birth parents are gone for many years, we found out who they are. And in the whole process, I was thinking about them, and you know, it was all bonus. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't something we were looking for, but it was definitely interesting. So some poems fell out of that whole experience. And this is one from the Mother section of Daddy. It's called, I've been told my birth mother believed in aliens. I've been told my birth mother believed in aliens, that when she was dying of breast cancer, she blamed her pain on things that had fallen from the sky. She was not angry at those things, I've been told. She was not scared of the aliens. I wonder if she was scared of us, the 6 children she birthed and abandoned or surrendered. If maybe we seemed more alien than extraterrestrials, more painful than her cancer, than the anger she might have assumed we harbored toward her. I've been told she ran off to Florida in the 50s, and I wonder if Florida sounded more glamorous to a small town Pennsylvania girl back then. I've been told she lived for a time in Hollywood, Florida, and I wonder if she loved sending relatives postcards from there, if she pined for the Hollywood in California. She left her husband, I've been told, in the 60s, leaving my older brothers with him. And I wonder what made her leave, and wonder why that impresses me more than it saddens me, imagining a rebel woman escaping a prescribed fate, not some villain, No, I've been told she was girlish, sweet. And I wonder if maybe she was just scared, if maybe she was angry and scared of her anger. I wonder if she felt more at home with us as aliens out there somewhere far away. I wonder if she wondered about us, wondering if we were angry or scared, or if we wondered about her, waiting for her to make contact. So as mentioned, I have this poem, this Stevie Nicks features in a lot of my work. I fell in love with words, I think, through her kind of cryptic lyrics when I was young. And so she's in the mother section. And she also inspired the first book I did, which was with University of Wisconsin Press. It was a series of essays where gay men wrote about the women who inspired them, and called My Diva. And started with an essay I wrote about Stevie Nicks, and then I got all these other guys to write essays about their divas. So I was kind of trying to think, how can I write a poem where I capture the voice, the quality of Stevie Nicks's voice, but only in imagery? So this is what I came up with. And the first line of it is actually from an unreleased song of hers. It's a lyric that just says, "There's a sound of birds rising." So I use that as the first line, and then I riff off that. In her voice, there's the sound of birds rising, not descending, rising, as if punctuating clouds, all commas, or the stifled whimper of a mother wolf, seeing her runt go limp. Composure for the survivor's sake. Maybe some lover's hand lifting, yoga-like, finger outstretched like those it points to, Michelangelo's ceiling. A sultry glance from behind oversized sunglasses, saying without saying, "I dig your hip huggers." That umbrella fringe trembling pre-storm, sand spray softly prickling newly browned legs. Or that woman adjusting her sari in the hot, dry breeze, always a few steps ahead of her husband. And girls, definitely girls, lying, twirling before dusty mirrors where they spy more beautiful versions of themselves. So I thought I would read a few more new poems. I'm working on a series now about clowns and comedians. And I have a B. Arthur poem and a Joan Rivers poem, and all sorts of clowns. And this is one of the first ones I wrote. It's called Court Jester, so it goes back to the older clowns. Court Jester. Tethered to the throne by my talent, of course I relish the power sometimes to light a gloomy countenance, my quips, my acrobatics, like trained lightning bolts, how the court in all their finery fold over their fat middles, snorting like boars at feeding time. At my best, I snatch away their hot air, letting it inflate my breast. And yes, I despise the king, the same way a parent abhors an infant whose shrieks shatter the serene night. Wars, plague, the queen gone lame with another bout of gout. He needs to play, to suckle, to forget. And don't I need someone to rescue, to forget I'm unable to rescue myself? It's most lonesome at night, the chill in the stone walls seeping into my blood, the nightmares in tapestry scenes, how I'd eventually fall out of fashion, out of favor, a stale loaf of peasant bread on a table jammed with cheeses and goose. Queer, crippled, I'd be a true fool not to be waiting for a shove through the gate, for the drawbridge to rise behind me. Always I hear the growling stomachs of his beasts getting ready for a snack. But make no mistake, I know love, not the kind the milkmaid dreamed of, nor the kind the queen gave up on. No, I have the attention of the king at his weakest, at his proudest. How many can say that? Exactly. I have that man by the balls. Only I can tickle them the way he likes. So this next one, I've been kind of interested in, I call it the generation of the openly closeted. So when I was a kid in the 70s, there were all these like fabulous gay figures, but they weren't allowed to say they were gay, but they were clearly gay, and everybody's mothers loved them. Charles Nelson Riley, Paul Lynde, Liberace, it's like Elton John, like everybody was so flamboyant, yet nobody would think that they were gay, So I kind of am fascinated by them. I think there's such an important bridge to, where we are now with gay rights. So I wrote this poem in honor of them. It's called No One Imagines Clowns Having Sex. Charles Nelson Riley, Paul Lynde, Rip Taylor, the original circuit queens, blowing up the 70s game show with one-liners that could make even Phyllis Diller blush. Finally, a place they could be leading men. Usually the first to be cast second fiddle, evil magician, sea genie, a greedy cartoon rat, or everyone's bachelor uncle. The prankster, perpetually tan, back from another cruise, no one asked where. Pockets bulging with innuendo, handlebar mustache slightly askew, donning his busiest blouse, scarf twist a frisky bow on a gift box. How the triangles lit up the center square. Primetime fools, attempting to fool no one, their mother tongue, irony, fluent in nuance, funneling outrage into outrageousness, tunneling with catty claws into living rooms where bored housewives doused vinegar into another afternoon's 3-bean salad. After so many cottage cheese platters, who wouldn't crave something saltier? These bad boys had no wives to leave, no wisdom that could send couples on honeymoons, pay for a new car, an extension on the house, loads of cash in their loaded answers, their delivery silly, snide, or spicy, somehow saying, without ever saying, whatever we weren't ready to hear said. So I'm excited. This new poem I have is going to be published soon in Allium magazine, which was Columbia Poetry Review, but they're changing their name out in Chicago. So I don't know if anybody knows Amy Sedaris. Everybody knows her brother, David. But Amy Sedaris has some shows, Strangers with Candy, and now she has this sort of cooking show. It's like a spoof of like a Martha Stewart kind of show. Anyway, I wrote this fun poem about her, and a lot of it comes from lines from her Strangers with Candy character and show. But I call it Amy Sedaris, Marry Me. I have a big crush on her. Amy Sedaris, marry me. I may be as gay as your brother, but I'm way more imaginative than your imaginary boyfriend, Ricky, that dick lick. He'd never buy you a Camaro. A Camaro. Come cruise with me, Amy, down to the quarry for a picnic in the dark. I promise to buy you a hot dog, and I'll never be stingy with the onions. No, I'll remember to sprinkle plenty of Percocet Jimmies on our potato salad, too. And I'll mean it when I ask who you are, understanding it's merely philosophical or flirtatious when you lick your lips before saying, who don't you want me to be? Amy, follow me into the makeout room. I'm not going to beat you or screw you, but I will admire your retro poofy girl drag or the shapeliness of your fatty suit, happily feeding you a Jerry Blank line whenever you're feeling parched. I'll be moist as a snack cake myself, especially as I rummage through your trove of costumes, prosthetics, wigs. And when I pose in your most mismatched of outfits, you just might realize you've met your match, inviting me finally to sit at your welcome table, covered in makeshift hors d'oeuvres, which I'm certain you'll forget to serve, as we'll be too busy chuckling like clowns, smoking their first stick of pot. So I'll read a couple more. Where am I? Oh, maybe that's about it, 7:50. So maybe I'll end with a quick short one. A more somber one. This is my friend's a farmer upstate New York, and I wrote this about his farmhouse when I was babysitting the goats one day. Ghent farmhouse, circa 1790. The low ceilings knock us, the way junior high boys tease a girl who towers over them. Flirtation or punishment for stuffing overstuffed furniture into these dainty rooms, blocking window frame views of the hills with large screen televisions. The birds have learned to sing louder over the years, I'm certain, when a nail jutting from the original hardwood floor snags my sock. These longer lifespans seem to rush by faster and faster. Isn't that what the goat is explaining when she stares me in the eye? A smile so gentle, wise, like she's been here before, or always, and it's her job to welcome or warn me. The gnats spin in a circle, making a clock in the air above the pond. The rain smells new, and I know it's a kind lie, like the goat's smile, gentle, like the tilt of the barn as it settles imperceptibly. The egg in my palm as warm as the mud on my boot. I try not to trudge across the field like a clumsy giant, oblivious to the crushing violence. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. That was wonderful. It went so fast. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Michael. First of all, I adore Jerry Blank, and I wish, yes, I think there should be a whole poetry book in the voice of Jerry Blank. Go ahead and do it. Brilliant, amazing. And of course, as you saw in the chat, David, I too am a philatelist, and I know how difficult it is to put that word out there and have that brief panic of worry about what might happen. And my father also has purported to, in earlier days, wanted to create his own system of how to win at roulette. So the idea of gambling and that whole world was like right here, like in this house for many years. And Cal, your work just astounding in that, in the necessity of us hearing the voice of Americana, and more importantly, the connection between the work of the people and how that intersects with the greed of others in a certain inhumanity. So thanks to the three of you for bringing us now to this moment, our final reader for today. Well, honestly, I'm always a little daunted when I have the opportunity to introduce Hilda Raz, and you'll hear in a moment why that's true. But if for nothing else, I think if each of you searched a little bit, you would find a direct connection to Hilda Raz and her work, whether that be because she published you as when she was the editor of Prairie Schooner for many years, which also established a first book award prize, as well as for many years being a leader through, and past president, mind you, which meant she did much work prior to the presidency of the associated writing programs, as well as just being a teacher and citizen, so had many students. And so it's every week. So each of you, I think, could find your lineage that would connect you right back. That 6 degrees of separation would evaporate very quickly. But most importantly is also the work of Hilda Raz, the work of her poetry. So even though every week I have the privilege of introducing poets to audiences across Zoom in time and space, and I learn a little bit about them, connect with some aspect of their poems and their biography, and maybe somehow how their work infiltrates my consciousness and helps me shape mine, which of course is the collective unconsciousness of poetry doing its work. It's, as I said, a rare day when I have the privilege of introducing a poet who has nurtured, shaped, supported, defined decades of poets and what we consider contemporary American poetry as a teacher, and then shaped the very fabric of American poetry as the editor of Prairie Schooner, and used this experience to build her own life work as she cultivated as she has continued to cultivate a dialogue with self as woman, philosopher, teacher, survivor, parent, child, participant, observer extraordinaire in 14 books. And I personally feel as if I examine every poem I get to hear or read in some way through the eyes of Hilda Raz, because Hilda's work resonates to me because I was her student many years ago at the University of Nebraska and got to sit in her office and learn from her every day as we pored over my own work. I'm going to also ask just to stop the share screen for one moment and just share that her generosity as a poet knows no bounds, and all the things she would introduce to me as I sat in her office and we looked at line after line of poetry. And Hilda, in her body of work, has left few stones unturned, few roads not traveled, as she fine-tuned her own poetic frequency to a sound and fury that has signified every aspect of what it means to be alive as a woman in a world in which she has stated in one of her poems in her most recent collection, List and Story, as the impossibility of stasis. Hilda, to me, represents the impossibility of stasis with a wry wit, an incredulousness, a circumspection, an introspection, and an awe at life's complex simplicities and the simplicity of complexion. And in the title of one of her list poems, in List and Story, which now has been followed by the book you just saw the cover for, Letter from a Place I've Never Been, New and Collected Poems, 1986 to 2020, edited by Kwame Dawes, and the introduction by John Kinsella. In the poem Women's Lib, Raz says, "Blessed be the womb put to use or not. Now dance." In Hilda's poems, we experience the dance of poetry with every line she curates in her distinctive voice, rooted in the body electric and eclectic. With youth and age and everything in between, from a life of poetry, well lived and written. To me, Hilda is the question and the answer to Muriel Rukeyser's lines. What if one woman told the truth about her life? The world would split open. Be prepared, my friends, to welcome the intimate experience of being split open here today, much as I was when I sat with Hilda in her office at Prairie Schooner in Andrews Hall in Lincoln, Nebraska, many years ago, where I listened and learned the art of poetry, as we continue to do, from the incomparable and much beloved Hilda Raz.
Well, how can I follow up that introduction? Thank you. Thank you to Susana H. Case, to Lynn McGee, to Carolyne Wright, and to Sandra Yannone, the incomparable Sandra Yannone. Kids, this was my job. I was the editor of Prairie Schooner and a professor of English, and also had a chair in the name of a wonderful poet, Glenna Lushai. And that's what I did for my life, my professional life. It was my job. I also happened to write poems, and I was lucky enough to meet Susanna Tamminen at Wesleyan, and she took very good care of my books over a number of years. Now the University of Nebraska Press has chosen to bring out my new and collected poems. I'm very pleased with this book, but it's so bloody heavy. Before that came, and just 12 months before, came List and Story. And we all know, most of us here are poets, to have 2 new books during the pandemic is not your best move. On the other hand, Sandra Yannone is such an entrepreneur, a literary entrepreneur. I'm grateful to you, Sandra, for all you've done for me and many other poets. I'm going to just read 2 poems to bring us home tonight. The first is the title poem, List and Story. It's a story, it's a narrative poem, but it's in fragments. List and Story. 1. First, we must go for flowers to the nursery. Spring is here. My heart speaks an utterance packed with many meanings, as the begonias have petals, some one color, some another, and all blending into that plant you chose for the hanging basket. My brother at 15 went to war. He was an infantryman, a photographer. He opened the camps with his fellows. Then he came home. He lived at home. He lived in his bedroom. He studied. He graduated. He married. And You knew that story. Sons. At 40, he took a gun into his mouth and pulled the trigger. He was in the woods where the bears go. He drove the old car. He didn't leave a note. He was gainfully employed. His sons, that utterance, and then peace. The red petals have fallen. The flushed petals remain. Leaves like steak knives, serrated, fleshly, the darkest green. We go to the garden with our children. We have graduated. We have married. The garden is our pleasure and utterance. Marriage, that pleasure, the making of food, the making of the yolk and white of one egg, the whirling of the mobile under which we make our children. Such pleasure moves. Let us tear the garden into ribbons. Let us transplant the white daffodils with their bonnets that bend backward. Let us move the magnolia corms. Let us divide the bulbs and the peonies. Who will take the children? I will. I will. 2. Who let the monster into the house? Who cooks the food for him, shops, plays the flute, drives the tumbrils? Who folds into the hay blankets, drinks the red wine, wears the jewels? Who hangs the blade over the fireplace with its jeweled hilt, braided scabbard? Who watches the savaging of the children? Utterance, one child. Where were you to say no? Leave a note, take up the gun. The body of the flowers in the hanging basket is multiple, blue stars and anise pansies and feverfew, the hanging vines of sweet potato. Its utterance is heavy moving in wind, creaks. The children play in the garden, on the swings, in the sandbox. One carries a greasy bag in his fist, bologna and chips, a slippery bottle of pop. They lock the door, they cavort on the rug, and it was evening. The monster reigns. Utterance, spring, summer, fall, winter, silence, and the smell of balsam. Pastries that you roll out on the floor, shape into log, apply frosting, display, bow, decolletage. And it was morning. The children under the tree, gifts and more gifts, the timbrels and bells, Bach and the great Germans, some candles, some fire. Who let the monster into the house with his axe, his drag tree, sticky sap? 3. I slid down the shut door, locked it. I hit the floor, stopped, I wept. She thanked me, that child with blood on her cheek. She thanked me with her bruised tongue. She thanked me with her utterance and disappeared. Never again, never again, never again, and so forth. And it was morning and it was evening of the 4th day. The basket was hanging on the porch in the heat of the day. In the night, in the cool garage with its lowered door, a moat between night and the house lurking. That utterance, a gun, that utterance, disbelief, that utterance, and in the house, the children. And now the story is over. Silence, penance, utterance, the page and the oranges, pears and wafers. 40 years in the desert of the sandbox where cats dig. And I'd like to close with Victory Garden, Grass Skirt. You'll hear a tone from E. Cummings. And you'll also perhaps know that I grew up during World War II. I was a child of World War II, and my brother was a soldier. And Victory Garden is what we all had. We had them. And we all had grass skirts. We had one, but not the other when I was very little. Mornings before the heat set in, I picked up my yellow trowel, exited through the back door, evading, as usual, my mother. The tomatoes were usually red by the time of the highest heat at noon. I had no intention of picking one and eating it, hot juice running down my chin, the smell, the crisp taste of first bites prickling. But you know that I always did. First one, then another, and no one seemed to notice. I grazed vegetable gardens all up and down the neighbors' hills. In junior high, Sue Ellen Smith brought from Hawaii the skirt, a sample of vacation ecstasy. She modeled it. We all did, one after another, and wiggled. The skirt wiggled too, hips. Who knew? I wanted jiggly breasts, but no, that never happened. My mother's favorite flower was gladiolus in a tall vase. Home from the grocery with a bunch, Niveus and gold ones in my arms, I take down her heavy vase from the closet. After my cutting and trimming propped in a circle, here they are, the only sign of reconciliation in the room. 12 ripe tomatoes in a bowl, about to reach perfection in the kitchen. What happened? I don't know. I didn't like that woman and she didn't like me. I was a cruel child. Verbs escape my memory, but our Victory Garden and Sue Ellen's skirt retain their fragrance. And I too love gladiolus spears, 14 buds on most stalks, and the sight of my mother's hands arranging and changing them in the window of my childhood as war raged in Europe and on all fronts. Thank you so much for being here with us all. What a pleasure. Thanks.
I think we can all unmute ourselves now.